So, welcome to AlignAI and featuring Path Robotics, turning data into actionable business outcomes. We're here joined by Rachel, and she's the Director of Business Intelligence at Path Robotics. And before we dive into the spiel, you give a nice intro to Rachel. AlignAI, we are focused on improving and working with analytics teams' capabilities and data and AI teams' capabilities. So today we're going to dive into turning data into actionable business outcomes. And we have Rachel here who has extensive experience in various industries. And we've asked her to join us to go through some of her field guide notes. So from P&G to Uber and Cover My Meds, she entered Path Robotics with the mindset of wanting to build and create something from her previous teams and take on, starting something from scratch. And so today we're going to go over like one of the common problems that Rachel's experienced out in the field, around tech versus non-tech users around this approach. And with that being said, I will give Rachel the ability to introduce herself as well.
Sure. Hi. As Ali mentioned, I'm Director of Business Intelligence at Path Robotics. Path Robotics is a startup in Columbus, Ohio, where we build manufacturing robotic cells that currently do welding. However, we've got our future sites on other manufacturing capabilities as well. So we're a earlier stage company, but we're growing really fast. I've been here for about 2 years. I previously have worked at Uber as an operations manager. I worked in finance and analytics at Procter & Gamble and worked in analytics at Cover My Meds. And I'm really passionate about working with data, but in the context of working with cross-functional teams and helping enable other employees to use data in ways that they really are unsure of, and kind of help them see what they can do with data.
Yeah, and that's a great intro. Thank you, Rachel. I'm curious, what was your background prior to going into the analytics space at Procter & Gamble and Cover My Meds? What was your business, like your university degree?
Sure. I have a degree in accounting. And when I started my career, I really thought that I was going to go start working at Procter & Gamble in accounting. And then I just get promoted until I was the CFO. And that is what I thought a career path was. And that was really the option I saw for myself. And then I started working at Uber and was really exposed to their analytics landscape and the way that different teams were using data. And it really kind of opened my eyes, but I really enjoyed the foundation that I had going in from the finance and accounting side of things to get that perspective of what's important for a business and how leaders are making decisions. So I feel like that was a really great transition to make in my career.
Yeah, no, that's great. And did you start off in Ohio as well, like in the Columbus area, or was there another area relative to that before that?
I started in Cincinnati for Procter & Gamble. However, I was traveling to their manufacturing plants in North and South America to do operational and other types of audits for them. And then I also worked in Lima, Ohio for Procter & Gamble, where I manage finance processes for their Tide plant.
Awesome. So yeah, you've really seen a lot of different industries across the board. So.
Mm-hmm.
And so we touched on this a little bit. So can you just go over when you were working with your analytics teams at these different groups, can you just lay out the different structures that you had from a landscape, just to get everybody level set here on the webinar?
Sure. So when I started at Uber had a pretty well built out internal data product that was built around the various end users across the company. So it was a comprehensive tool that they had made from scratch that was designed to be used for the various functions. And one of the big things about it that made it so usable was that it was perfectly built for mapping functionality. So we did a lot of analysis where we needed to look at cities and see efficiency metrics, and the tool really helped you dive into different data points from a operations perspective, from a marketing perspective, from a finance perspective, but allowed you to tie that to the mapping and geographical functionalities within the platform. So that was really cool. That's where where I learned SQL. That's where I learned a lot of my like core analytics skills with Data Viz. I worked at Procter & Gamble. That was my first job, and that is really your traditional large corporation. They have a lot of tools at their disposal. They used SAP. They had a lot of systems that had existed for years. And that really helped me kind of learn to kind of communicate with different teams and different platforms. But also I kind of went in there where the structure was already built for data communication from a manufacturing perspective. Covering Meds is a little different. So Covering Meds was also a pretty fast growing company when I started. However, I came kind of later in the game after they were acquired. So they were using data in a lot of different ways, but that was just constantly evolving over time. So when I started there, I was a client-facing analyst, and I worked in a silo for our pharmaceutical customers. But over time, the company started centralizing analytics teams, and we created product analytics teams so that we could make sure that the communication around analytics between what we were saying to the customers, what we were saying to engineering teams, and what we were saying to our other stakeholder teams internally was all synchronized.
That's amazing. And so now we kind of shift over to, like, we're going to dive into your experience with Path Robotics. Let's lay out maybe some of the differences, because I know you and I have talked about this. And then for those that don't know, I've worked with Rachel, with the Path team over the last, what has it been, 2 years, year and a half?
Yeah, about a year and a half.
Yeah, about a year and a half. So I just wanted to, again, frame this up specifically in Path Robotics as we dive into the problem statement that we're going to discuss later. So the size, org structure, and the need. Do you want to add some context to these numbers?
Yes, definitely. So I was actually employee number 57 2 years ago. And we have, I think for almost a year now, I've had over 200 employees. And so that is just really fast growth. The number of new teams and new positions that was created over that length of time was extensive. So when I started, most of the company was part of the engineering org. I actually started on the sales organization focused on sales analytics. But we've since have built a manufacturing facility where we need operations and manufacturing teams, and we actually have people traveling to customers to deploy our robot cells, and really have built out the internal business functions as well, which is where I sit. I sit on the finance team as director of business intelligence.
And so then it was like moving into, like you said, from that sales team to be able to create, like, the need from the organization or the ask from leadership was to be able to create that single source of truth, right?
Yes. When you're at a startup, people like to make Google Sheets. So there might be 5 different Google Sheets that are talking about the same thing, that have data that should be the same, that is maintained differently. So there are just a lot of different communication streams. There's a lot of Slack messages, a lot of people reporting via Slack messages on a daily basis. So there's definitely a need to create sources of truth so that everyone can get on the same page and understand how we're moving as a company.
And from your perspective, there's always like this balance of like moving fast, right? But also like putting the right processes in place. I think the next slide might talk about this too, but like from your experience, what was the first realization that you had taking on this director of business intelligence role? Like, what was like, oh my gosh, we need to do our first, X, Y, and Z?
I think my first realization was that many people didn't really understand what data was and how they could be using it. The number of times I heard that there is no data, or there wasn't any data to work with, or data wasn't relevant to a situation was a lot. And I had to do a lot of education to say, hey, our deployment schedule, that's data, and the dates in there, those are data points. Data doesn't necessarily mean a database where you have hundreds of records or thousands of records that you are analyzing. There's data every day that we are communicating to each other, and that has to be organized in a way so that we can evaluate it and figure out how to make decisions.
Yeah, I think, like, to your point, it's not really how much data do you have? It's, are you using the data that you do have effectively, right? Exactly to your point. So let's talk about, the problem that we're going to discuss a little bit further today. I know this is a problem near and dear to your heart through our multiple discussions about the non-tech users and tech users needing the same data, but then how do we design for both teams and actionable insights? So like, what was the first use case that came, like, that was apparent to you? Maybe it was at Path, maybe it was at Uber and P&G, but like, what was the first like signal, like, hey, there is a big difference here?
Well, I think it was more, this was more like a big realization for me. When I worked at Uber, I was working with a lot of very technical users on a daily basis. So any type of analytics that I was doing and reporting out to were people who were technically savvy. They could do their own reporting. And that was great. And that's where I decided that I wanted a career in analytics. And I thought, okay, cool, I'm going to go to other companies and do similar things. And I find that in fast growing startups where that isn't the central focus of an organization, you don't have a lot of people like that. People are scared of data. Data can be intimidating. I think I started out at Path and made a bunch of what I thought were excellent dashboards that I thought people would use every day and that they would get all sorts of insights. And then I would check the adoption numbers to see how often people were looking at them, and they weren't. They just weren't looking at them. So when I went to go have a conversation with, for example, someone in operations and say, hey, like I put this data together for you. Was this helpful? They admitted that they looked at it and they weren't really sure what to do with it. They weren't really sure how to utilize the filters. And they just didn't really know where to go. And they're moving so fast that they didn't have time to stop and figure that out. So that really made me reevaluate in terms of how I was going to work in order to deliver insights. It had to be different for each use case. And I had to really collaborate with the business partners in order to understand what they needed and deliver it in a way that they could quickly use and internalize without needing to kind of learn how to use a new tech tool.
Yeah. And I think to get everybody on the same page too, like, I think there's different degrees of what's technical and what's not, depending on what domain you're in. So just like level set with everyone too, in terms of like, tech users versus non-tech users, and you coming from, Uber, and then like making your way through different enterprises, and then, back to a startup. Do you just want to talk a little bit about like what you see as the difference of a tech user versus a non-tech user in some of these examples?
Yeah, and this is just want to call out, like, this is definitely by no means referencing anyone's technical prowess. It really is like kind of the people that are using the technology that you're using for analytics, and then those who are not, but they need to be a beneficiary of it. So there's a lot of engineering, different engineers that we work with that have different understandings. They obviously are dealing with a lot of data every day. Also, product managers are usually involved with a lot of the data resources in order to do a lot of their road mapping. But then on the non-tech side, you have a lot of business leaders. So you have people working in finance and accounting. You have managers of different departments across the company. Obviously, you have your leadership and C-suite who really just want to see the landscape of what's going on across different departments. And then you have your teams on the ground. So those that are doing logistics, those that are in-house doing operations, and really just trying to manage things on a day-to-day basis.
Yep. No, I think that's great because it's so easy of like, what is a technical user? What is not a technical user? And even like, what is an analyst or what is not, who is not an analyst? Almost anybody really in the business to a degree is an analyst, right? It's just, what degree of their job is dedicated towards, running the numbers or being, savvy with the data sets, right?
Yes.
Okay, so, and then like, let's talk about the framework for an analytics process too, of like, where we talk about, this is a very like high level view, right? Where we have analytics solutions and data sets. And then from the solution side, right? Just a level set as we talk about like some key takeaways for like designing Viz, right? You start off with action decisions. We move into like visualization interface side of things, and then calculation and model, storage, organization, ingestion, and then the data source and collection. From your point of view, are there any specific areas here where you have to start when you're working with these technical and non-technical users, or does that answer differ based off of who you're talking to?
I definitely think it differs based on who you're talking to. As someone who has an analyst background, I always it'd be nice if everything that I did just resulted in me like, oh, let me just make a quick dashboard with data that I already have available that's clean in a database, and then I can do some data viz, and that's what I spend all my time doing. In a startup, that data doesn't typically exist in that format. So you need to make sure that you have your data sources in line. You need to make sure that everything's accurate and that you have data governance over all of it, and that you have the ability to get that into whatever tools you're using for interfacing or visualization. In order to do that, you really have to do interviews to understand what someone's using it for, because I'm not an expert on all the data sources. I didn't come in being an expert on the data sources across the company. I had to learn what they were doing for their role, what systems that they were using, and then I had to document and outline a lot of that in order to then make sure that the data that we needed was in the right place for me to then turn into visualizations and interfaces that they need.
Yeah, did you find like your counterparts within those organizations struggling with that same methodology, or how was that like knowledge shared, or how did you get upskilled in that when you came to that realization?
What I really loved is that I work with a lot of really awesome people at Path who are really smart. So a lot of people had attempted to build their own systems to meet their need. So they had likely spent time thinking about what that looked like. They might have done some dashboarding. They might have done some flow charts and things like that. So usually I could take what they had started and then get some additional information and help them organize that better. And that was really awesome, because really the people that know it best are those closest to the work. So they had often made things like Google Sheets, and very advanced Google Sheets where they're really utilizing the functionality. So things like that, I would usually use the tools that they had started with.
Yeah, and I would say I've even received like just people scratching things on paper, in previous days, like, hey, here's what I'm thinking, so no matter if you're working with those technical or non-technical users, just like engaging that conversation, to your point, the sooner the better. And if they can give you something tangible that you guys can either, whiteboard out, get it on a lucid chart, whatever it might look like. I think that's an excellent point and takeaway.
Yeah.
So the there, when we were talking earlier, there's about roughly about 3 different pillars of like takeaways that you and I were talking about. So the first one is like upskilling yourself and your team, and then also the rollout factor. So that to me like kind of comes at the people aspect of that. What are your thoughts around like what are some key pieces of like when you roll out with your stakeholders and upskilling yourself and your team?
On the upskilling side of things, my team, we really have to be an expert at the processes that we're working with. Sometimes that involves shadowing. A lot of times that involves sitting in and daily stand-ups to really understand how the team is working. That helps build relationships, but it also helps us understand the systems. And then we have to be experts in the systems. I've never been an expert at NetSuite before coming to Path, but that's a tool that we're using every day. So I really need to be well-versed in that if that's a data source that I need to tap into to do reporting. So that's some of the work that we've done. In terms of rolling things out with stakeholders, generally we create kind of a partnership where we're learning about their processes, we're documenting everything, and then we're helping with change management as well. That's a unique role that I have on my team. I have a business process manager who handles all of that. So we have a lot of documentation. And then when we roll things out, we do check-ins. We do a lot of monitoring in terms of, are people actually using this dashboard? I might make a dashboard that shows whether people are actually inputting things into the tool that we've created to like actually see where gaps are. And then we can go back to teams and say, hey, it looks like we're not seeing data come through in that interface that we made. How can we help you make this better? Is the first iteration something that needs to be tweaked in order to work for your team?
How do you draw that line of like what is the MVP that you're releasing out to the said stakeholder, and then also the features? Because usually the first ask comes right from that team member or the stakeholder, and then a whole bunch follow as time progresses. So what is that? How do you manage that relationship and structure with your stakeholders to deliver something without scope creep, essentially?
That's always a tough one. I mean, I definitely have a tendency to want to build something perfect and amazing and take a long time to do that. But in this environment, we need to do things quickly. So usually I will take a look at what they're doing currently and understand like, all right, what could we roll out that is going to be an improvement on that, but gets kind of the bare minimum job done. So that's kind of the bar that I set, that it needs to be an improvement on the current process. And then I need to have what the incremental next steps could be documented so that they can understand that as they start using this tool, once they adopt it, that's when we're able to unlock other potential avenues of time saving or efficiency with next iterations of whatever we've built.
Yeah, and I think that kind of pops us over to the right-hand side of like the process around like building it and the transparency along with your stakeholders. So when you're going through that process and transparency, so you talked about like having them and showing them that roadmap. Are there any other mechanisms that you use when you're working with those stakeholders to drive value from like your data viz or design visualizations?
We like to do a lot of flow charting. I like to do wireframe. Sometimes it's hard to visualize what the end result might be. So as we're working on the project, we like to do a wireframe to give them a mock-up of what that could look like. And then we have a lot of feedback sessions to make sure that they feel comfortable with what they're looking at.
Yeah, and you also touched on having a business process manager, which I think is a very unique design with an analytics team and the ability, and I think this kind of leads us down the middle path, right, of treating the end result or whatever you're building, whether it's a dashboard, an AI solution, maybe it's a data collection system, treating it like a product in the end, right? And also the requirements gathering. So how does that business process manager help you like gathers those requirements and treating it like a product?
She really leads that entire effort. So she, number one, just has really good relationships across the company. She really sees it as her job to know everyone, to know what types of meetings happen on an ongoing basis. So she sits in on a lot of different team meetings so that she can anticipate needs and have that consistent relationship with the teams. But then as we start the process, we get going, she gathers requirements, but then we also are able to communicate timelines and roadmaps so that people can see the vision and stay up to date on the work that we're doing. And really just making sure that all of the feedback that we get is documented so that we can always, when we're building, refer back to different things that we've heard the team say. And then once the change management happens, we're always available to meet with the end user and make sure that they understand how it works and understand how to use the tool.
Yeah, that's great. And I know you prepared an amazing example for us, so I want to dive into that as we so just let me know when to hit the next slide as we dive into that, and I'll let you go from here.
Sure. So an example I wanted to give is related to our production data that comes from our robot cells. Our robot cells are doing a lot of work, but we have an interesting component where we actually have to get manual quality input from the end user, so the technician that's actually running the robot. So we at Path, we've created a tool to collect this information, but we have this data in a database so that we can tap into it for various needs. So I was just going to do like a quick walkthrough of how we've thought about different user personas and how they might use that data. Historically, I feel like I would have looked at this and thought, oh, you can just build one dashboard. I know that the term self-service has been really popular in analytics. So you create this tool that anyone can go find anything that they need and you just put it out there and people will come use it. But really, we've had to kind of walk through the various use cases and build different instances using the same data just for different teams to use. So I was going to walk through how we've progressed in this, and this is absolutely a work in progress. This data is masked and some of it's edited for privacy reasons, but I thought this was a good example to go through. So you can go to the next slide.
Okay, so there we go.
So just a few example personas that we've had to work with. We have leadership, a customer account manager, and a software engineer. So with leadership, they are often looking for high-level data to see how the business is functioning and growing over time. A customer account manager, they are typically dealing with the customer individually. So they're looking to be able to go on deep dives with the data to understand what's happening at that particular customer and be able to communicate about what's happening back to the customer. And then we have software engineers who are often trying to get information on how the cells are performing and understand what they might need to do and take action on based on performance. So you can go to the next slide. So just a dashboard example for leadership. There are high-level overviews that you can make. So on the left-hand side, we have, all right, we want to look at last month. We want to see how many parts were welded by each robot. What I really think is important is that leadership doesn't have a lot of time. So when they're looking at things, they need to be able to make a takeaway really quickly. So for example, I've got these scorecards in here. They say how many parts were welded last month, but then I'm also showing the percent increase over the month before so that they can see where we're trending. Definitely want to notice if there's a quality change over time so that they can quickly see what they need to do to determine what teams might need to take action there. And then on the right, this is kind of comparing trend lines over time. So we've got parts welded on the left in that middle chart, and then we have quality rating on the right. I, as an analyst, can look at this and see, all right, we have this one cell number 4 that's showing a downward trend in parts welded. And I'm also seeing this downward trend on the quality rating. So those things might be related to each other. One thing that I also like to do with leadership is have ongoing touch bases where I'm going to analyze the data for them because I'm going to pick up on these things quicker. And then I'm also going to get feedback to how I can make this better in the future. So I might have a meeting where we just open the dashboards that they can look at any time. We're going to dive through different trends and I'm going to make edits and make changes for them so that they can better isolate these things and determine, are we seeing a trend in our volume based on quality? Is this something that they need to be concerned about? But otherwise, they just can see that most of our cells are actually increasing in volume.
Yeah, no, I think this is a great visual representation, right? A quick hit of what's going on in the field for leadership.
Yeah, definitely. So customer account manager, they're going to want to look at more granular data. So we've got weekly welding breakdowns. We've got quality rating over time, so they can pinpoint any issues the customer might be complaining about down to the week that it happened. And then there might be something that would be helpful. So this one on the right, average minutes per inch of weld. So it looks like we've been welding quicker. So that might be something and welding quicker and more consistently. So that's something that they could take to the customer and say, hey, we've seen this improvement that's going to build the customer relationship. That's going to help with retention. So there's all sorts of things that they might want to dive in there, but you want to make sure you give them some positive. You want to make sure you give them some things that they can dive into, and then just generally know the health of the customer.
Okay, and then I think the last one you had on here was the software engineer. Yep.
Yeah, so the software engineer might be interested in similar things. So it's nice to see the consistency over time. They might also be interested in how much we're utilizing the machine on a weekly basis, because typically the utilization is going to be driven by downtime. One thing that I don't have here that's visible, but something that I would build so that they could actually dive in to look at the individual records of what we actually were doing, so that they could troubleshoot, was this related to a specific part template that we were using? Was this related to a specific customer that we need to dive into that cell, or is this a trend across the cell? So they're going to need a little bit of everything. So you're going to need summary metrics. You're going to need a data catalog so that everyone's on the same page in terms of what things mean. And then they're going to need to be able to explore the data at the granular level so that they can determine what they can do from a troubleshooting standpoint.
Yeah, for them to be able to marry up what's going off in the tangible world and then marry that up with the back end, right? So to your point, I think that's great. And then I know we have a few more slides. This was just a touch base on, as you went through this process, some key takeaways and just reflection of as you went through this process with your different stakeholders. How do those things line up? Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I don't know if you want to comment, but I mean, it's definitely, this is all ongoing activity that we're working on. So we continue to kind of iterate on it, and all of these factors are necessary for us to keep developing new visualizations and tools for different departments.
Okay, and then I know we're about, I think we're almost out of time. So I just wanted to touch on adoption here, and your thoughts for measuring and monitoring adoption across the organization. And like, what are some metrics you use across the organization to ensure that as you are developing these different visualizations or analytics for these different team members or stakeholders, what are some metrics you use to make sure that your deployments are trending upward and not downward?
Yeah, so most tools will give you viewing history or viewing analytics. So I definitely want to see what teams are looking at this, what individual users are looking at this, how frequently is this something that they're using on a daily basis? Are there tools that we've deployed that aren't being viewed? And is that something that we need to archive or tweak to make more usable? And then we can use that to kind of reach out to the teams and see where we can help them or make improvements, or roll things out that might be going well that are used frequently.
And then, yeah, I think it's important, right? It's that control piece of it. And like not control, but like the improvement piece of how do we make this better and continuously having good engagement across and relationship building. And then last, one final thought as we wrap up this webinar, and I know we're over, so thank you for everyone who's hanging in there with us. If you were giving advice to someone starting up their BI team or starting off on these, analytic initiatives, maybe it's not just a startup, but it's also, an enterprise, and you're trying to rally a team together, what advice would you give?
I would say you really just need to get to know the business and understand what's going on in different departments, and start building those relationships. I love that about my team. Like, the work that we do is for others. So everything that we do adds value and just needs collaboration.
That's awesome. And, I just want to thank, Path Robotics for being a great partner, and along with Rachel for joining us today. And if you want to learn more, head to Get AlignAI. We have different classes or trainings on data storytelling, agile for analytics, and all the rest of these. And then we're also sneak preview building a product as well. So if you want a demo of how to have your AI and analytics teams collaborate, please join us. And a big thank you to Rachel. Thanks so much. Bye.